Stop. Please don't touch me. The words came in a rasp, thin and broken, like a branch ready to snap. They didn't come from a ghost, though for a moment Eli Ward thought he had opened the door on one. She was there, on his cabin floor, dirt-streaked, wrapped in torn cloth, eyes too wide for her face. The lantern light caught on the raw tremble of her lips, and he froze. Men in the West had seen plenty saying, starvation, gun smoke, prairie graves dug shallow. But Eli had never seen a living thing look so close to already gone. Her voice cracked again. Please, don't. The cabin's silence pressed against him. Only the wind outside moved, rattling the shutters like knuckles on wood. His hands still clutched the doorframe. He'd come back late from checking his cattle, never expecting his life would hinge on what waited inside. Every instinct told him to step back, to let this stranger's misery stay where it belonged, outside his walls, outside his skin. Folks around here didn't forgive easy, especially not a rancher offering shelter to someone who didn't belong. And by her dress, her markings, the braids clinging loose to her face, she didn't. The West was not kind to women of her blood. Eli's breath came sharp. He had buried enough already. His wife, gone to fever. His boy, taken by a horse that bolted on a storm night. He'd sworn never again to open his door to something that could cost him more. And yet here she was, her body shaking like a fawn in the snows, her words little more than windblown ashes. He knelt without meaning to, lantern light stretching his shadow long across her. He noticed the cuts along her wrists, the dirt caked under her nails, the way her feet were bare, bloodied from miles of prairie. Whoever had sent her running hadn't meant for her to live. The hook of choice sank deep. He could walk away, pretend she was never there, or he could take her in, risk the fury of neighbors who already whispered his name with suspicion. Her eyes locked on him, desperate, pleading. And Eli Ward, rancher, widower, a man who prayed no more, felt the question burn in his chest. What if opening this door cost him the last of what he had left? Eli should have sent her out right then. That would have been the sensible thing, the safe thing. A rancher living alone on the edge of Caldwell County had no room for someone else's trouble. Folks around here made judgments quick, and when they did, they sharpened them into blades. Yet, he didn't move. The girl lay on the floorboards, her breath shallow, her skin gray beneath the dirt. Eli saw the outlines of ribs pressing through her rags. Hunger had chewed her down to bone. He thought of his boy, Josiah, how fever had hollowed him in the same way, stealing flesh until nothing was left but the shell of a child. He remembered the sound of that shallow breathing, and his throat went tight. He went to the shelf, pulled down the tin cup, and poured water from the pitcher. The girl flinched when he brought it near, pressing herself back against the wall. "I ain't gonna hurt you," Eli muttered, his voice rough from disuse. He set the cup on the floor, slid it toward her. For a long moment, she only stared, eyes clouded with fear. Then, with hands that shook too much for her years, she lifted it, spilling half down her chin as she drank. Eli turned away. He didn't want to watch, didn't want to care. Caring was what got men gutted. But the decision, he realized, was already made. If she stayed the night, word would get out. Neighbors rode by often enough, checking whether Eli still belonged in a county that never fully claimed him. They'd see her, an Apache girl, no older than 16, maybe 17, and they'd draw their conclusions. Harboring her would mark him as traitor to his kind, outlaw in his own land. Still, when she tried to stand, her legs buckled. Eli caught her by instinct, steadying her against his chest. She tensed, whispered again, "Don't, please don't." He froze, then slowly loosened his grip, letting her lean against the wall. It wasn't just fear in her voice, it was memory. Whatever she'd run from had taught her that hands meant pain. Eli stared at the floorboards, his jaw set hard. He'd promised himself never to pick up another burden, but here it was, looking at him with eyes too hollow to turn away from. And outside, in the distance, a coyote yipped. It sounded too much like a warning. By dawn, Eli knew the choice he'd made couldn't be hidden. Smoke from his chimney curled high, and in this part of the county, smoke carried news faster than any rider. The girl, her name still a mystery, sat wrapped in one of his old blankets, staring at the embers. She hadn't spoken again, not beyond a few broken words. But she watched the door like a hunted thing, shoulders tight, as though expecting someone, or something, to come crashing through it. Eli saddled his horse, telling himself he'd ride into town for supplies, maybe find out if anyone was looking. But before his boot hit the stirrup, he heard it. Hooves, not one, several. He stepped back, heart thudding. Riders crested the ridge, moving steady, too steady to be cowhands on their way to market. Eli counted 3, maybe 4, all carrying rifles across their saddles. They weren't hiding the way men do when they mean peace. He went inside, bolted the door. The girl's eyes widened, her body pressing against the corner. Eli grabbed his old Henry rifle from above the hearth. It felt heavier than it used to, like it knew it had no business being called on again. The riders slowed as they reached his gate. He could hear leather creak, horses snort, the low murmur of voices. Then a knock, hard, deliberate, shook the door. "Ward," a voice called. "We seen tracks in the prairie last night. Bare feet, small ones. Led right up here." A pause, then colder. "You harboring something that don't belong?" Eli's jaw tightened. He glanced at the girl. Her fingers gripped the blanket so hard the cloth tore. "Open the door, Ward." The second voice was meaner, sharp as broken glass. "We'll take a look for ourselves if you don't." The cabin walls felt too thin. Eli knew these men. Neighbors, ranchers, men who claimed law by sheer numbers. They wouldn't wait long for permission. And if they found her, he stepped closer to the girl, speaking low. "You stay quiet, no matter what happens." Outside, boots hit the ground. Heavy steps moved toward the porch. The knock came again, louder this time, rattling the hinges. Eli's finger brushed the trigger. The room filled with silence so tight it could snap. Then came the words he dreaded most. "Ward, you open this door, or we burn you out." The pounding on the door shook the walls, but inside, time slowed. Eli stood frozen, the Henry clutched tight, sweat running cold down his back. He'd been here before, in a different way. A night when fever stole his boy, and neighbors crowded the porch, whispering prayers he didn't ask for. Back then, he'd opened the door. Tonight, he couldn't. The girl's hand touched his sleeve, light, trembling, barely there. Eli looked down. Her eyes, dark, fearful, but steady now, met his. She shook her head once, as if begging him not to spill blood on her account. For the first time, she seemed less like a fugitive and more like a person holding on to the last thread of hope. "Why'd they chase you?" he whispered. Her lips parted. The words came halting, cracked. "I ran. They kill my family. I live." Eli's chest burned. He saw in her gaze not just fear, but a grief so raw it mirrored his own. They were two people broken by loss, thrown into each other's path by a world that didn't care. Outside, the voices grew louder. "Ward! Last warning!" Boots stomped against the porch boards. Metal clinked, rifles being readied. Eli should have handed her over. It would end the trouble in a heartbeat. No man would fault him for choosing safety, but as the girl clung to his sleeve, he remembered Josiah's tiny hand curling around his own. He remembered Mary's whisper on her deathbed. "Don't let the world turn you hard, Eli." His throat worked. He set the rifle down on the table, then crouched so his eyes met hers. "You trust me?" he asked. For a heartbeat, silence. Then, hesitant, she nodded. The door rattled again, harder now. Splinters cracked around the hinges. Eli rose, "Msties." Every step toward that door weighted with the choice he'd made. He'd stand between her and whatever waited outside, no matter the cost. He opened the latch halfway, just enough to meet the glare of the men on his porch. Dust blew across their boots, and the sky behind them swirled with storm clouds. "What you're looking for," Eli said, voice low and steady, "you won't find here." The silence that followed was sharp as a blade. Every man's finger tightened on his rifle. Every second stretched long enough to break. And behind him, the girl whispered the one word that bound. Him to his choice forever. "Please." The men stared at Eli, eyes narrowed beneath the brims of their hats. Dust swirled in the wind between them, carrying the taste of storm. One of them, Cole Denver's, neighbor and self-appointed enforcer, spat in the dirt. "You lying Ward. Tracks come straight here. Apache girl don't vanish into thin air." His rifle shifted higher, the barrel catching the gray light. Eli stood square in the doorway, arms loose at his sides. He hadn't raised the Henry. Sometimes a weapon drawn was invitation enough to start a fire no man could put out. "You calling me a liar?" Eli asked, voice calm as a church bell. Cole sneered. "I'm calling you a fool if you think we'll let this slide." Behind Eli, the girl's breath trembled. He didn't turn, didn't dare give her away with so much as a glance. Instead, he let silence carry, the way men do when they've chosen their ground. Finally, another rider shifted in his saddle. "Cole, storm's comin'. Ain't worth fightin' over. If Ward wants to rot alone in this cabin, let him." The wind gusted stronger, whipping grit across their faces. Cole's jaw worked, but even he knew men didn't light matches on the eve of a thunderstorm. With a curse, he jerked his reins. The others followed, hooves pounding off across the prairie until the sound thinned into distance. Eli closed the door, bolted it, and leaned back against the wood. For a long while, he said nothing. Neither did she. Only the storm spoke, grumbling low above the plains. At last, he turned. The girl was still crouched by the hearth, blanket clutched around her shoulders. When their eyes met, she whispered, "Why? You help me?" Eli's throat tightened. He thought of his boy, of Mary, of all the graves that wind had covered. He thought of the way the neighbors' rifles gleamed in the stormlight. He could have told her the truth. That he didn't know why, only that something in him refused to close the door this time. Instead, he said simply, "Because someone should." Her eyes filled, though no tears fell. Slowly, she nodded. The storm broke then, rain lashing against the windows. Eli stirred the fire, its glow warming the small cabin. For the first time in years, the place didn't feel hollow. He knew tomorrow would bring questions, whispers, maybe worse. But tonight, in the company of a girl the world had already cast aside, Eli Ward chose to keep the door open. And sometimes, in the Old West, that was the bravest thing a man could do.